my name is Jonathan Keane, and thank you for joining us today for our next panel discussion on expanding the tech ecosystem on NDRC's regional expansion. So I'm joined by three panelists today that are involved in the NDRC's efforts to expand the regions of Ireland and various startup hubs. I'm joined by Patrick Walsh, who's the CEO of Dogpatch Labs, and by Mary Rodgers, the CEO of the Galway City Innovation District and Portershed, and finally Ian Browne, who is the CEO of Ignite Northern Ireland in Belfast. So I think I'll start with you, Patrick. Obviously, the NDRC has been around for a long time, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit about this new incarnation of the NDRC and give us a bit of a flavour for what it's trying to do now with the regions.
Sure, yeah. So look, NDRC is Ireland's national accelerator, and it was established 14 years ago. And originally it was operated by a consortium of universities. And so now it's being run by a group of startup hubs from across Ireland. So Dogpatch sort of led the bid, but in close cooperation with Portershed in Galway, representing that section of the country, Republic of Work in Cork, RDI in Kerry as well. But the other thing we did was we partnered up with our friends up in Ignite in Northern Ireland, who are based out of Ormy Bats, another hub there, because there's so much knowledge and best practice, so much opportunity for cross-border innovation as well, that it made a ton of sense to work together closely with the guys who run Northern Ireland's National Accelerator.
Okay, this is quite interesting that so many different spokes from around Ireland kind of came together in this one thing. I mean, I particularly look at something like the Portershed, Mary, where that's been such a vital cog for Galway startups for the last 5 years, I believe, this year. Can you talk to me a little bit about how the Portershed and your efforts are going to be integrated into Dogpatch and Ignite and all the others, and how you're going to expand in Galway, but also why it's important to link up with other hubs as well?
Yeah, so what attracted us to the whole NDRC initiative was the hub and spoke model of getting to work with hubs around the country and really driving that regional agenda. So for us, it's all about the high value sustainable jobs in the West region. And it was great to see everyone coming together. And so now NDRC has like a national platform. So whatever county you're in, you have the same access. There's programs going on all the time. And whether you're in Donegal or Kerry or Tipperary, it doesn't matter. And before that mattered, you had to travel to access the services, or it was city centre located, and now it's throughout the country all the time, and that was key for us. And so our remit is really from Galway up to Donegal, Roscommon and Mayo and Sligo, and we'll get on the road as soon as we can. And in the meantime, we're virtually engaging with all of our other hubs that are all the way up there and all the other key stakeholders in the region.
Mm-hmm. And then Ian, obviously, as Patrick mentioned, you want to kind of introduce kind of more cross-border collaboration between you guys up there in Belfast and all the guys in Dublin, Galway, Cork. Can you talk to me a little bit about what Ignite will be doing as part of that effort?
Yeah, I first met Patrick, I guess, probably a bit over a year ago. I think you brought a team up to Belfast to kind of just have a bit of an open discussion about like what was happening and how we could kind of join North and South a little bit more based on our experience in running, because Ignite's been running sort of accelerator programs, both like venture backed and also in partnership with Invest in the North for maybe 10 years, and kind of 250 plus companies. I think probably a bit over £100 million in seed capital now raised through there, and we wanted to bring sort of what we've done and sort of help build like kind of a national ecosystem, because entrepreneurship doesn't really care about boundaries, opportunity doesn't care about boundaries, and like we find that the best way to help entrepreneurs succeed is by building out networks, and it's the network that really adds the value. And so it really was a no-brainer for us to kind of get involved and help as much as we could, and I hope it's going to continue and sort of really develop both sides of North and South for the foreseeable future.
Because obviously Ignite has worked with startups at a very early stage and give them that initial boost that they need. But then we often hear about startups looking beyond their native towns and cities because they need to find more funding, or they need more help finding customers to kind of maybe kind of leave leaves a nest, so to speak. How, speaking for Ignite, and I'd love to hear about Patrick and Mary's thoughts on this, how will this help startups and encourage them to stay at home, so to speak, and build and scale in their respective towns?
Well, I think the last year has really helped us a lot, right? So it's taken away the sort of the need to get away from where you are to build a company. You know, Northern Ireland's a small country, so you always have to think straight outside there if you're going to build a big business. Ireland's the same. The UK is the same. It's a global market now. But what has happened is now that you can be based anywhere and grow a company from anywhere and scale it from anywhere. The scaling was always a problem because of the talent base, and I don't mean that as far as quality goes, just quantity, right? So there's not enough people, not enough skilled people to build a huge company in Northern Ireland, UK anymore. But the workforce is now global, so it means that there's no reason you can't build, you know, a huge company from Belfast, Galway, Sligo, Dublin, Cork, Portrush, Derry, wherever you want. It doesn't matter anymore. So I think that's really something that's pretty exciting for the next 5 years.
And or Patrick or Mary, I was keen to kind of get your thoughts on that as well, as far as building kind of local champions, so to speak.
Yeah, well, look, you know, we talk a lot about connectedness being a really important thing that we focus on. And if you look at the top performing ecosystems around the world, whether that's Silicon Valley or places like Tel Aviv in Israel, you know, they're very tightly connected, and they're consciously thinking about those knowledge and connections transferring across. So, you know, this idea of sort of thinking about Ireland as a whole, as a global city, as being connected across in a better way was something that I really thought was important to move our ecosystem forward and to consciously build those links. But then in the last year on top of that, while we were tendering, of course, COVID happened, and that sort of accelerates that ability to connect in different ways online. And so the idea is very much that an entrepreneur can come and build their startup from wherever they're from. They don't need to leave their hometown. Say if they're in Galway, or even if they're in Sligo, they can go through Galway. They have a direct pass into anything that Dublin can offer in terms of all the Google mentors or all these different mentor pools that are here. But equally, we're connected globally through the Google for Entrepreneurs Startup Hub Network. We're connected to 50 startup hubs around the world. And that's what inspired actually this network as well. And so we can connect that entrepreneur globally. So connectedness is a competitive advantage that we are consciously now working on.
And also, Mary, I'm interested in also how kind of diversifying these hubs can also help kind of diversify the people that are getting involved in these hubs and can bringing more people in and giving them the support they need. Can you talk to me a little bit through the kind of efforts that NDRC and yourselves are making there?
Yeah, so again, NDRC have got diversity and inclusion at the fore of everything they do. And so it's not just a nice to have, it's definitely integrated into the delivery of all of the programs. And that's been great to work with, to actually have KPIs and accountability and systems in place to ensure that we're meeting those targets. So even on the Founders Weekend, I think it was nearly over 40% of females participated in that. Like, we have metrics of 70 to 30% females for any of the programs that go forward, and again with an international dimension. So we want to attract people to Ireland as well. So the diversity and inclusion program is very extensive. I'd say it's definitely not fluff at all. We've taken on bias training, we're all engaged in the process, and we want this to work for everybody. And even in the mentors, so there's 40 key mentors I think involved throughout Ireland supporting all the startups. And again, diversity is 50% female, 50% male there. So that was a bit of work. We went out and found the people, the key, they're all drivers in their industries, and they're there to support startups, and the startups have access to those mentors regardless of where they are in the country, and that's huge. So you've got Pat Phelan, you've got Brenda Romero, you've got Joe Smith, all of these people giving their time to support the companies.
I'm conscious that the initiative is still very young and new, but I'm curious to know what kind of developments have happened so far, what kind of startups have you been working with. Are you able to discuss anything like that?
Yeah, sure. Well, the job started, if you like, on the 5th of January this year. That's when we started. Obviously, we had to activate, mobilize, new team, being formed and coming together. You know, the Dogpatch team working with the other hubs as well, but also learning from Ignite. You know, there's a lot we've pulled and learned from those guys. I mean, they're the largest early stage, I think, accelerator investor across the UK. So, you know, there was so much learnings that accelerated to get to that starting point. And then we started to launch all the programs, turn the web pages live in February, and then start to deliver programs. So office hours, a founder weekend, and a pre-accelerator all live. So and masterclasses is the other piece as well. So we've this other piece which is about not just training the startups, but training all the people trying to help startups. Whether you're an accountant or a lawyer or a startup hub, a lot of startup hub came to these. So we've seen just incredible signups for this, and over, you know, in less than the first 100 days, over 450 people have engaged in one of those 4 things, right? Which is incredible. So, you know, I mean, it just like we've really hit the ground running. We've really got out into the ecosystem. We've created the awareness, but we've also engaged with lots of different founders, and we're really happy with the start, and we want to continue now. The first accelerator is what we're recruiting for at the moment. Applications closed for that in 5 weeks, and it'll kick off in a couple of months or so in June. So that's the next big one, is building up to the biggest one, I suppose, which is the accelerator itself in June.
I guess looking towards June, and actually just to a point that Ian touched on over the last year, obviously that's changed the way we've kind of view work, or how we define work, or where we do our work. As things get reopen, how are you going to strategize around that, as far as actually having kind of physical get-togethers? Is that actually going to happen anytime soon? How is it going to work, or is it still going to be very much digital? Whoever wants to jump in there first.
Well, I'll kind of say something there, because we've obviously been running programs for the past year. We ran 2 last year, one of which started in person, then went fully remote, and the other one was fully remote. And then we're halfway through 2 programs at the moment, and they've been fully remote the entire time. There are pros and cons to both of that, both the approaches to that stuff. I think the pros massively outweigh the cons. We really believe in the cohort effect, so support by peer network, right? So there's a group of companies going through a program at the same time. In person, you tend to get a stronger cohort effect faster, because you just meet people and there's that natural dynamic. So it just takes a little bit longer when you're in the program remotely, but once you get there, it's still equally good. But the pros of running a program remotely are that it just takes away the geographical constraints. So all of a sudden you can get people who are in, you know, the West Coast, or in Australia, or in, you know, Taipei, or wherever they may be, and they're very willing to give like an hour, 2 or 3 hours of their time to help a cohort, but it's very difficult to get them to kind of, you know, fly to Ireland for the day to run a session. So the quality of people involved goes up when you can run it remotely, and really you just have to work extra hard at the kind of cohort dynamic to make sure that it's just as good. But like, it's been a fantastic experience for us running the programs remotely so far, because we've been able to engage people from lots of different countries. Like, getting back to what Mary said as well, is like that really helps increase the diversity of a program as well, which is super important. Because like, the more diverse the cohort, the better the ideas, the better the quality, the better the results that come out of that stuff. So although it can be more difficult to do it remotely, we found it like a pretty positive experience. And so regardless of what happens in the next sort of 3, 6, 9 months, you know, it's really, you know, it's not a difficult thing to generate a very high quality program.
And
I think, yeah.
Sorry, no, Mary, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it was interesting on the Founders Weekend, which was virtual, and that was a tricky, because that usually works really well in person. But one of the companies got to find a co-founder, and because they had access to the person, like, who was living in Dublin, that probably wouldn't have showed up at a Galway Founder Weekend. So it has definitely advantages, and they are going on to solidify that relationship and hopefully start growing scale. So it's good.
I'm also conscious that on this panel we're represented by Dublin, Galway and Belfast, but obviously Cork and Kerry is involved as well. How will this expand, or does it plan to expand? Are you looking at other towns and cities that are looking to get involved? How is any kind of expansion there?
Yeah, so look, the initial focus is making sure we're sort of building this network effect where those hubs act like sort of nodes in a network, and they have this hub and spoke, spoking down to other regional hubs, etc., in their respective regions. So one of the things we've been doing is an engagement plan and systematically reaching out to all the hubs in our respective regions. So I think Mary's, been speaking to the hub up in Sligo, for example, and many others around it. And the way they get supported is, well, one, they have a direct line in terms of where their startups can be sent to and referred to, but also many of those hubs, I think over 45 hubs have attended our masterclass series. These are half-day workshops so far and have shown great interest. So we're kind of leveling up those other parts of the ecosystem as well. And then I think once we get through this first phase of activation and mobilization, then I think we can see how do we add more hubs to the hub and spoke model, et cetera. And I think that's something that, the ambition would be that we would evolve it in due course after we get through this initial phase. But the point is that there's a kind of a level one or a point of interaction that's happening right now, both for the startups and for the people who are operating those hubs. That's happening right now as part of a big part of our focus. It's a big part of our time is making sure that people are connected.
And a key part of that, I think, is the signposting. So we engage all the time with the different hubs and the different stakeholders like Enterprise Ireland, the local enterprise office. I mean, whatever program is running, it's like, oh, you're not ready for this, but you should engage here. And likewise, they're signposting back in. So there's definitely barriers down, and collaboration is really surprisingly going well. Everyone's really excited to kind of be part of the ecosystem and get engaged. So we'll talk to the guys in Cork and Kerry all the time, but equally we talk to people in Tipperary or Louth or Laois or wherever they are, and ensure that their startups are getting the supports that they need and work with New Frontiers and all the different programs that are on offer.
And does your program engage with policymakers and government to kind of discuss how further supports could be introduced for startups? This is a conversation we have quite regularly. I'm interested to know how NDRC is engaging there.
Yeah, well, look, I can speak to policies in the Republic of Ireland, certainly. And look, I feel very strongly that we should have a better policy environment in this country. We have, it's one of the top fiscal policy environments in the world if you're Google, and one of the worst if you're an entrepreneur in the OECD. And I sit on the National Competitiveness Council, and we need to think about our economic model and the stability of that, and how the world is changing currently and being accelerated through things like COVID, and have a more balanced economy. There's nothing wrong with FDI, it's just we want to balance it out, right? If we can become one of the top countries in the world in FDI, why can't we do the same with entrepreneurship? But our fiscal policies and our government policies need to reflect that ambition, and they currently do not. So it's one of the reasons why, entrepreneurs love to give out about policy on Twitter, but that doesn't change the game. What the revenue commissioners need, what policymakers need, is they need white papers, they need structured voices, they need advocacy, that's what the Irish Farmers Association do. They get systematic about it. And so one of the things that we focused on in Dogpatch in the last couple of years and spun out, and now is a completely independent organization, is Scale Ireland, which is led by Brian Caulfield and as chair, and Martina, who's the CEO, and Liz McCarthy did a lot of work to establish that. And that is a policy voice for entrepreneurship in Ireland. And they're focused on things like investor relief, share options, etc., CGT, R&D tax relief. And it takes time to change policy. It's not something that changes overnight, which is quite frustrating to entrepreneurs because they like to get stuff done fast. You have to plug at it. But we have just put there's actually this week, there's a big submission around EIS, which is investor relief. And there's a lot of focus going into that currently ahead of the budget later this year. So we can't just have great accelerators. We need every part of the ecosystem to be functioning at a world-class level, including policy. Will not create a world-class ecosystem without that. And policymakers need to understand that. Yeah.
Okay. you mentioned that you're also talking about in the Republic of Ireland. So Ian, have you kind of brought comparisons, I guess, of what maybe has been working in Northern Ireland that could work in Ireland? How have those ideas exchanged worked?
Yeah, 100%. I think what Patrick's talking about there is, I think there's sometimes some frustration, particularly from the early stage finance market in Ireland, at their sort of lack of competitiveness with the UK at the same stage, because there's very good tax relief for early stage investments in the UK, so which also has some downsides, because you get a lot of capital flooding in that's not necessarily appropriate for certain companies, but it's a really good thing, because what it does, it drives capital, it helps with commercialization, it helps with that first bit out of the gate, and I think that is worth talking about. The UK is looking at changing stuff as well, and in fact, it's kind of taking a more backwards look at the moment, which is kind of not going to be great for the early stage ecosystem. But I think policy is important. I do think that both the governments with North and South actually should be given credit for what they're doing at the minute with the early stage sort of support for founders, because certainly in Northern Ireland, it is like Invest in I are kind of the economic agency who help with a lot of this stuff, and they have helped Northern Ireland become the best place in the UK to take a company from 0 to $1 million in revenue. Which is amazing, like compared to anywhere else in the UK, which is really, really good. And like we struggle a little bit beyond that, we struggle to scale companies from there, and that's one of the things that we're kind of really focusing on right now. But then that's where the policy question comes in. What can be required, what can be changed at that point to help people do something differently? So yeah, and like we have an open dialogue with Patrick and everyone sort of in the Irish ecosystem, see how we can help that. Browne was up talking to us last week, actually, from Scale Ireland, and let's just say he thought the Northern Irish executive might be a trickier challenge than dealing with the Southern government. But there's an open dialogue all the time. We want to learn from each other. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah, and I should say, actually, Anine makes a good point. This is not a reflection of the other efforts that governments are doing to support startups at all. Actually, I think it's extraordinary. I speak to startups in other ecosystems, and they're like, seriously, they'll match funds on every seed round? Are you kidding me? And they're giving you money to build your startup hubs, and like, so don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great work. It's just that, there is certain other things that need to be done around share options, etc. if we really want to get the party started, or evolve to the next level, is a better way of putting it. Yeah.
It can always get better.
We'll keep pushing for it anyway.
100%. Yeah, totally.
That's one way of putting it. So Mary, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, listen, I feel the same as the lads. We support, we don't advocate directly. We go through Scale Ireland for any policy changes, but yes, some changes need to happen. But the supports that are there are great. I mean, I'm sitting in our new podcast studio funded by Enterprise Ireland, and they've been hugely supportive to the hubs and to the startups in the region. So, and the local enterprise office, and there's so many more supports out there. So I think we're lucky, but there's a lot to be done on the policy side, particularly on early stage investment.
Okay. You might soon see that policy reflected then in development of the regional ecosystems. Right, so guys, the clock is winding down, so we'll wrap up here. I want to thank the panelists, Ian, Mary, Patrick, for joining us. We appreciate it. And for all our viewers, make sure you get involved with the conversation online here. Join us at The Business Show IRL on Facebook and Twitter, and hashtag is Rebooting Ireland. So guys, thanks very much.
Thank you. Slán. Bye-bye.